Back to reconvening, and I'd like to welcome everybody. If everybody could take their seat, that would be wonderful. Okay, so I would like to welcome you back. Just for the ladies who are on today's panel, I'm just going to remind you for your earpieces. Well, your earpieces aren't a problem, but whenever you're not speaking, if you could make sure that you just have your microphone off, that would be very useful. So thank you very much. And also, I'm sure you know about interpretation. But what we're going to do is I would now like to welcome two witnesses for this next panel. Before we get started, I am going to notice, because everybody knows that today we do have votes. Bells will be going at 5:15. I believe that we have, and we will take a vote at that time, but I believe we all will go to at 5:25, and I'll ask for that unanimous consent at that time. But we only do have two panelists during this time, and although we're starting late, it will all work out in the end. So what I would like to do is provide, just to begin, I'd like to welcome the Native Council of Prince Edward Island, and we have Lisa Cooper, who's the president and chief. And from the Congress of Aboriginal People, we have Jessica Savoy, who is the national youth representative. I'll pass it over to Lisa Cooper for your for your 5 minutes of testimony. When you see my arm going up, please wind up your time.
Thank you. So I do want to give land acknowledgement. I am from Prince Edward Island, which is my traditional ancestral homelands of my ancestors, of the Mi'kmaq peoples. So hello, members of the Standing Committee on the Status of Women. My name is Lisa Cooper. I am the President-Chief of the Native Council of Prince Edward Island. My organization has existed since 1975, advocating for the rights of off-reserve Indigenous people for nearly 50 years. Just recently, there has been an instance of a missing and murdered Indigenous woman in PEI. Summer Kneebone was reported missing on August the 7th, 2023. My organization rallied around the family immediately, and we spent the next month working closely with the municipal police, RCMP, and volunteers to locate Summer Kneebone remains on September 15th. In this instance, there were many issues that my organization encountered in our search efforts. The municipal police force and our CMP officers did not know what the acronym MMIWG stood for. They did not communicate with each other to coordinate our volunteer search efforts, and PEI had not yet implemented a Missing Persons Act that authorized the police or RCMP to request access to Summer's social media records. As Canada's smallest province, cases of MMIWG are not as common for us, but situations has untold impacts on smaller communities. My organization works closely with our sister organization, the New Brunswick Aboriginal Peoples Council, in supporting their Looking Out for Each Other project. This project is a collaboration between the maritime provinces in reporting cases of missing Indigenous peoples and coordinating efforts between our provinces for search efforts. We have found through this project that there are many cases in which an Indigenous person goes missing in one maritime province only to be found in another province. This project has shown on a small scale the success that can occur when search efforts are coordinated across different provinces, organization, and police services. The Right Dress Alert that is being proposed by the government will be a natural extension of the work already being done in the maritime provinces and will be welcomed greatly by our communities. Between 2017 and 2019, I served as a representative of the Congress of Aboriginal Peoples on the MMIWG Working Group table, providing input on the 2021 MMIWG National Action Plan. In the 3 years since the MMIWG National Action Plan was released, I have seen little commitment from the federal government to address MMIWG to LGBTQIA+ off-reserve communities. The MMIWG National Action Plan provided an inclusive definition for distinction-based supports that included off-reserves, urban, and two-spirit representation. over 80% of the Indigenous people in Canada live off reserve, and yet our voices is often silent in consultations. In moving forward in the development of the redress alert, I ask that the federal government uphold the inclusive approach to MMIWG promised in the National Action Plan and ensure that the voices of the off reserve Indigenous peoples, as represented by the Congress of Aboriginal Peoples, can be heard in the development of the redress alert. Thank you, honourable members, for your time. Malalian.
Thank you so much. And we'll continue online with Jessica Savoy. Jessica, you have the floor for 5 minutes.
Good evening, standing committee members on the status of women. Thank you very much for the opportunity to bear witness to this important issue. My name is Jessica Savoy, and I'm a proud Nisga'a woman born and raised in the beautiful unceded Coast Salish territories of what we now know as Vancouver. I am calling from unceded Coast Salish territories, and I just would like to share briefly. I am the Vice President of the Northwest Indigenous Council and the National Youth Representative for the Congress of Aboriginal Peoples. I'm happy to be here with you and to advocate on behalf of my community as well as the CAP National Youth Council and to better the lives of all Indigenous peoples in Canada, to help in doing that. So I just wanted to share also, most of my life I've worked with community to implement policy, engage on important issues affecting them, and to work with Indigenous and non-Indigenous youth within the inner city neighborhoods of Vancouver, but also across the country through my representative role with the Congress of Aboriginal Peoples. I have experience working with local nonprofits and municipal governments in various capacities, and so I wanted to just share my experience and perspectives on the Red Dress Alert and some insight from the CAP youth on its implementation. We know that in May 2023, the House of Commons supported a motion that deemed the ongoing crisis of missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls and 2S and gender diverse peoples a national emergency and called for funding for an alert system to inform the public when an Indigenous person is missing. In December, through the MMIWG working group, CAP participated in the Red Dress Alert engagement with the Family and Survivor Circle. They chose to engage CAP and others because the federal government wasn't engaging enough groups. Much work remains and requires the perspective and insights of all Indigenous partners. The Red Dress Alert was also on the agenda of the Indigenous Federal Provincial Territorial meeting held in February, and again, we were not fully included in this conversation. I do want to note, though, I was invited very last minute to witness inside of that room the IFPT meeting, and so we were not fully included in this conversation, but I was able to witness parts of that engagement. So, given the history of colonialism and abuse, the often reported anti-Indigenous racism in the delivery of policing services, the killing of Indigenous peoples by police officers during mental wellness checks, and the dismissal by law enforcement of those reported cases of missing and murdered Indigenous women, girls, 2S, and gender diverse peoples, setting up a Red Dress Alert will be challenging. We know this. Governments have a responsibility to address these issues, especially in urban areas where policing is delivered by mainstream policing services. Call to Justice 5.8 calls on all governments to enact missing persons legislation. Preliminary national research on missing persons legislation in Canada identified huge gaps. Many provinces and territories do not have missing persons legislation that covers MMIWG, and Canada is currently lacking national standards for investigating cases of MMIWG 2S+. Without these in order, prior to implementation of a Red Dress Alert system, the process will fail to address systemic racism and build trust. CAT PTOs have already begun this work, and I would like to share with you an example from New Brunswick. In that province, working in collaboration with the right stakeholders, a national helpline was set up to help provide support to Indigenous families when loved ones go missing. Established by our affiliate organization, the New Brunswick Aboriginal Peoples Council, in partnership with the Gignu Transition Health, established 1833-MMI-FIND, which is the helpline for families in need of direction. It's a 24-hour helpline that serves as a support, provides information and a referral service to families to navigate the various systems when a loved person goes missing. I do want to share that the 1833 MMIFIND support line is a good example of what can be accomplished when the Indigenous communities lead the work. Equitable and respectful engagement is critical to the success of any program or policy. Okay, I see the government is developing and co-development is essential. I will leave it at that, but one more note I wanted to make is the current model with the distinctions-based approach is not necessarily working because, offers of Indigenous peoples are often left out of consultation process. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I'm going to keep this session very, very tight as we know we've got time. So I will be cutting everybody at that 6-minute mark. I'm going to pass the floor over first to Dominique Vienne. Dominique, you have the floor for 6 minutes.
Merci beaucoup, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and good afternoon, ladies, and thank you for being here today. Our study is extremely important. First of all, I think it's very promising. We hope it will be promising for women and girls, Indigenous women and girls. Now, how can we land it in a way that is relevant, effective, a red alert system, red dress alert system, so that we can make sure that there are no longer any women or girls who find themselves in impossible situations, and some of whom lose their lives. Ms. Cooper, how do you see this system? Do you see it being a nationally based system? One that would be part of this organization? We've heard that levels of police forces, you want them as partners, but not necessarily as managers of the organization. I don't think there's really anyone around this table who is questioning the relevance and importance of this organization, but rather, what do you think in a very practical way? How do we set this up? How do we put it in place? Who's dealing with it? How much will it cost? Will it be Canada-wide? What does one do in areas where there's no cell reception, no connectivity? How do you see these things?
Thank you. That's a very good question. I think that there are models out there that can be used. If you're looking at like the Amber Alert that's used for missing children, so I think there are models out there, and the Amber Alert is Canada wide, and I absolutely think there can be a model that is done like that. A lot like PEI, where it is small. We don't often see murder and missing here because they go to New Brunswick, they go to Nova Scotia, where they end up in the bigger cities in Toronto. So I think absolutely there needs to be a Canada-wide. And I think there are models out there that can be utilized, such as the Amber Alert, for something similar to this. The Looking Out for Each Other project that we partner with New Brunswick and Nova Scotia does kind of a 3-province approach, that there is that 1-800 number that they can call and they can get the supports within 3 provinces, and we work closely together to share information. Quick and dirty. Oh, I'm sorry. I said it was quick and dirty answer because I know she's going to cut me off. She said this is going to be really a fast one. So I'm just trying to give you an example that could be utilized.
I'm just going to stop. I think I'm looking at Dominique. It's just silly, something like I would say that's just fun and silly. That's all. English translation, hard. Yeah. Well, it's all good. It's all good, but I'll just continue the clock and we can just resume.
Madame Cooper,
Ms. Cooper, I was busy taking notes of what you've been telling us. For example, I didn't really understand the... May she continue with her answer? Oh, she'd finished. All right. So, Ms. Cooper, with respect to funding and the involvement of various police forces, I believe it was you who said that there had been problems in terms of interpretation, communication. Things weren't easy. They didn't understand Indigenous culture. So, with respect to the management of this new program, we've heard that it would be managed by Indigenous communities and hopefully by women. What do you have to say?
I think it is essential to be community-led. It needs to be Indigenous-led. Like I had indicated in my speech, that the police and the RCMP weren't really aware of what MMIWG meant. So there had to be a lot of cross-cultural competency training with them. It's about rallying the community. We were able to rally the community through social media. So I think social media does a great job for education. We were able to rally not only people in our community, but over 200 people showed up for the search. So I think, there needs to be a lot of education and support around this. But when you're looking at taking the lead, I think it needs to be Indigenous-led.
Est-ce que Madame Cooper...
Ms. Cooper, with respect to criteria, so, for example, you launch an alert, a redress alert. Now, with respect to criteria for launching the alert, will it be the communities that decide on the criteria that will trigger this alert?
For our organization or our community, I can't speak on behalf of all, we are tight-knit in our community. A lot of our women that are at risk are homeless. They suffer mental health and addictions. So it was almost 10 days before the family noticed that there was no response from their child. So that's what triggered us into the actual search and the connection with the family. We have since put an action plan in place where we are staying connected to our vulnerable population that are the homelessness, the mental health, the addictions, the ones that are involved in the child welfare systems and poverty. There's so many areas that puts them at risk. So we do a lot now with the community about how do we check on each other and how do we make sure that we are doing regular check-ins with the most vulnerable populations.
C'est terminé?
Is my time up?
I'm now going to pass it over. I'm sorry. I'm now going to pass it over to Sonia online. Sonia, you have the floor for 5 minutes.
Thank you,
Actually,
Madam Chair.
Lisa?
I think Lisa was the...
Go ahead, Lisa.
Moi, j'étais prête, mais je pensais que ma...
I was ready, but I think that Ms. Vienne said exactly what I wanted to talk about.
committee is in favor of a redress alert. That's not even a question. We're all in favor of it being Indigenous-led and culturally appropriate. So really what we're trying to nail down in this study is what it will look like and what's the best way, how do we approach this next. So we had, as my colleague Michelle Ferreri mentioned earlier, we had a phenomenal witness earlier this week who set up her own red dress alert system. I can't remember what she called it. It was something else in her community in Nova Scotia, and managed to get, I think, 4,000 people signed up to receive these alerts. And she is managing the whole thing herself, but it's really effective because the people who are receiving the alerts have all signed up. They all are engaged. They then go on and share these alerts on their social media pages, and it has a really far reach. She's had extraordinary success in helping find and save Indigenous women and girls and to us LGBTQIA people. I think 96% was the success rate. So maybe, Lisa Cooper, you can just sort of talk to us about this model and whether this would work across the country. Because the other model we have is the Amber Alert, for example, which is a national platform but rolled out and sort of managed by provinces and territories who then decide the parameters about when the alert's going to roll out. So maybe you can comment on some of these different models and how you think it would work best.
We didn't really create a model with our action plan. It was more or less a learning lesson from the summer knee bone case. We were lucky enough in our searches that we had volunteers that were non-Indigenous allies and community members and members from that community that she was from. And we were lucky enough to reach an instructor who was teaching a law course from New Brunswick or Nova Scotia who happened to be over, and he got his students involved online while we were doing the search. He had his students online. They were able to track a vehicle that's similar to hers, and because of the using social media and the people that were connected through social media in his classroom, we were able to track this vehicle down that was just recently sold. It wasn't the actual vehicle. But I think, it's dead on of what they're thinking is that you can not only depend on Indigenous communities, but in Canadians as general, when there's a call out and a process that you can utilize, a common social media platform that you can utilize, you would be amazed at how many people will get on there, especially the younger generation, because they're much more technologically witty than me. I don't use social media very often. But the amount of people that we had, it had to have been close to 400 and 500 if you're looking at social media. Amber Alert is something that I use as an example, but this one I think needs to be Indigenous led. And I think it needs not only Indigenous, but non-Indigenous, because they are our allies. And they can share information and the resources that they have. It's like giving you 500 sets of eyes. Like you can almost track somebody down with 500 sets of eyes. So they are really dead on. Well, I don't want to use acronyms or examples because it might be mistaken on. They're very correct in social media is the way to go. I think if you're using like an Amber Alert, there needs to be connections to each other, right? We need to be able to connect to other organizations far and wide. People like we have a current person here that's from Newfoundland, Indigenous, that's at risk. I have one from Ontario. If you look at Chantel Moore, she wasn't from New Brunswick, but she was one that got murdered by a police officer through a wellness check. So I think there's such an impact across Canada. It doesn't matter where you're from.
And you make a good point that often when Indigenous people are kidnapped, that they're not kept in the same spot. They're moved off to a different province or a different part of the country. And so it makes sense that this is sort of national in scope. But the idea in Jennifer in Nova Scotia's Red Dress Alert is that people sign up for it. Do you see that do you see this as being something that goes to everyone's cell phones or something that people sign up to receive? And yes, she got lots of non-Indigenous allies signed up, but these are people who said, yes, I want to know and I want to help when when someone goes missing, and I think that's a big difference between the Amber Alert system we have now. Would you support something like that? And the other thing about having people sign up is that you get their landlines if they don't have cell phones. You can reach people in remote areas other ways, not just trying to send messages to cell phones. So maybe you can reflect on that.
I think that's a great system. For PI, we don't have a lot of sex trafficking. It's more couch surfing and taking advantage of homeless women. But sex trafficking is there, and they do move them quickly from province to province. So I think, if you were to set up a system like that, I mean, you look at Idle No More. How quick did that start with some youth and then went through Canada-wide? The whole Idle No More movement. Look how many people are involved, and they're still talking about it, So, I mean, if you look at Black Lives Matter, this social media platform nowadays is the way to go if you're trying to share information. And I don't think it would be hard to set something up where people can join in on the talk and join in on the discussion and do a quick check. Hey, there might be somebody missing on PEI. Anyone, might want to share the picture or might want to share this, but I think there needs to be a lot of also consultation and discussion around that because there is privacy acts that I think you need to be careful of. And I think you need to be careful of someone's privacy if they want to be found.
That's exactly what I was going to say. Yeah. There's some people that don't want to be found for good reasons.
Thank you so much. And thanks for that, Lisa. We're now going over for the next 2.5 minutes to Adrienne LaRoche. 6 minutes for Adrienne. 6 minutes. Go ahead.
Oui. Merci beaucoup, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yes, I will. I do want to thank these witnesses who are extremely interesting. So, Lisa Cooper, every time I have an opportunity to talk about this, we heard about the red letter, I can't believe that these women and girls are victims of violence to this extent. So I sort of have to get a grip on myself. So, ladies, the first thing I would like to ask you both to respond to, perhaps Madam Cooper first. So, Madam Cooper and then Ms. Savoy. Now, I look at what's happening internationally in many areas. There are initiatives in other places that might be useful. Can you think of anything like that? There are, for example, American states that have already implemented alert systems for Indigenous women and girls. In the state of Washington, for example, there are various criteria for launching an alert. When someone disappears or the person might be in danger. My colleague, Madame Vien, already mentioned this, about criteria. How are these criteria set up and defined elsewhere? If you could talk about the criteria, please. Elsewhere in the world, I mentioned the U.S., but you might want to mention other interesting initiatives.
I would have to do some research on that. For me, I think on PEI itself, and I can only speak on my experience, when there's a missing person, they do put an alert out, and it kind of goes to all of our phones, and there's an alert sound that comes, and then it says, missing youth, please contact, So it doesn't necessarily have to be a murdered person. It could be a missing person. It could be somebody of interest that they're looking for. And it is an alert sound that comes on our phones, and we go on to it, and it's looking for this person. Can they notify? Sometimes it could be a runaway that they then later say has been found. But when you're looking at something like an Amber Alert or a red dress alert, it can be the same concept, that especially when you're looking at the most vulnerable that are homeless and living on the streets and living in couch surfing, they are the most vulnerable. So if they're not contacting their family on a regular basis, it took 10 days before this alert went. We are now prepared for any alert or anything that's a red flag in our community of an Indigenous woman that's homeless that we work with among the tent city, and that if we don't check in, we don't see them in the next day or 2 or 3 days because we have mobile teams out, then we sound the alert within our organization, and then we start working with the police to sound that alert in the higher sense of putting it out to the province. So again, I think, talking to organizations that actually do the frontline work, I think is realistic, because there is, and no disrespect, there's a theoretical model. I'm not going to read off the MMIWG report. I spent 3 years creating that. And the MMIWG action plans, their theoretical models just don't work in most places. Each community has to develop a model that works for their community. How impacted is the community? How involved is the community? How far reach is the community? On PEI, we have 3 zones, Prince, Kings, and Queens County, so we can reach the whole island wide. So I think, but, mine's a model that fits PEI, but I think each Indigenous community has to fit their own model into this. I don't think we can put into being a checkbox thing. It's basically, I think, drawn from the community.
Madame Savoy, je vous ai vu acheter de la...
Ms. Savoy, I saw you nodding. Do you have anything to add from your experience with respect to criteria?
Hi there. Thank you for your question. I do want to note, I know that there was another question asked, and I would like to build on what was already said, but in regards to criteria or other supports that could be extended, I just want to give an example of something that had been done to address missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls in British Columbia. And it was as a commitment to truth and reconciliation, Rogers Communications had placed 3 towers along Highway 16. Highway 16 is known as the Highway of Tears due to the high number of Indigenous women and girls reported missing from the highway. And so I just wanted to make note to that. And then also around other supports that could be extended, there was conversation or a question asked around, how do we reach, communities who may not have access to cell phones or that type of technology. And, I just wanted to say, I feel like we really need to be looking at the intersectionality of overlapping oppressions that are impacting our communities, and more so our Indigenous women and girls. I think there's a lot of supports that can be extended, and through that, what is really needed is the human, technological, and fiscal capacities within our communities to be addressing the issues. Non-status and off-reserve communities have felt the greatest impact of these colonial policies, and I think to ensure that we are keeping our communities safe, there need to be more measures in regards to like economic, social, cultural, and political advancement within our communities in order to address the ongoing violence that our Indigenous women and girls, Two-Spirit, and gender diverse people are facing. I'm not sure if that answers your question.
That's perfect. Thank you. I have to push you over to the next person. Thank you so much, Adrienne. I'm going to pass you over to Leah Gazan for 6 minutes.
Yes, thank you so much to the witnesses. So happy to have you here. I just want to follow up. I know, Madame Cooper, you spoke about alerts, one of the questions about being able to sign up for it. I know in the consultations, one of the concerns that has been brought up is because the normalization of violence against Indigenous women and girls has been so normalized. We know that in systems, call to action 9.1 to 9.11 with policing, in society, the concern is that making it optional, people will choose not to sign up. If on a wide scale, so that's my first. What do you think of that analysis? The second very quick question I have for you, because I'd like to make sure I have time for Madame Savoy as well, is why it sounds like yours is community led. I would assume it's also woman led. Why is that important? Is it woman led? And why is it important that it's community-led prior to going into existing systems that seem to be failing?
Really good questions. I think if people have to have the choice. You can't force people to sign up. You can do a lot around the education of why it's important to sign up, and do a lot of promotion out there and campaigns on why it's important to sign up. But ultimately, you can't force people to sign up. Really, it's up to their choice. For the second, we have a number of programs. I have over 60 staff and 30 programs. So we not only address missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls, we have a missing and murdered Indigenous men and boys. We use CAP's Walking in Your Moccasins model to work with men, because if we're going to keep our women safe, we have to ensure that men provide the support and advocacy for women and women's groups as well. So we want to show our males how to be a healthy male. A lot of that's been taken away from colonialism, as the gatherer of food and bringing home the food, and the war and protecting the women. That role has been changed through residential schools, 60 Scoop. So now we're looking at redefining men's roles in the family. So I think they kind of go nice in partnership. Our Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls has a committee that is all girls. But if we have a session, we also do MMIWG with MMIMB as well. So we combine the two in support. Our action plan is built directly from the community up. So it goes out to our community, and our community does input. We were I don't want to say fortunate enough, but we understand through Summer Kneebone's experience what needed to get done. We're still dealing with that, even though it's in 2023, because it still takes time to get through the courts, and the families want to answer now, and they want to understand now, and they're angry.
Thank you so much, Madame Savoy. I mean, you're a very critical voice. I know. I mean, you're clearly a leader in this area, but you also are providing a youth perspective. You've spoken a lot about systemic violence, Madame Savoy, and I'm wondering, especially with policing, I want you to expand on that more. What would that look like in terms of oversight, considering the current system, current relationships, going forward? Like, what's the solution to that? Thank you.
Thank you, your question. I think in regards to the relationship of police forces and the justice system with Indigenous peoples, oftentimes over different jurisdictions, we see the increase of the budget for different police services. And I think what is really needed is an allocation of wraparound services for our families. And we need to be able to advance the social and economic gaps that are related to addressing ongoing violence against Indigenous women and girls and Two-Spirit peoples. I hope that answered your question.
Yes, it does. In the city I'm from, Winnipeg, we've actually had 6 deaths that involved police in the last 3 months. In the past 3 months, a couple related to mental health. Looking at prevention, because of course we're talking about the red dress, we never want to have to issue one because people should be safe. Do you think having more mental health supports in place would help prevent some of the vulnerabilities currently in place? If people had safe places to go to?
It is without a doubt. I think, culture and access to culture is a preventative measure, and I think we need more preventative measures rather than reactionary. I think definitely more mental health services for sure.
Would you say wraparound supports mean before a red dress and after a red dress?
I think womb to tomb, we need those wraparound services for our families from the moment of inception until, wherever, hopefully a good way to end our, whatever happens. But yeah, we need wraparound services for our families. It's so dire before a red dress alert happens.
Thank you so much. I have 10 seconds, but I love that womb to tomb. It's pretty powerful. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Because of our time, what I'm going to do is drop it down to 4 minutes, 4 minutes, 2 minutes, 2 minutes, and I'm going to pass the floor over to Michelle. Michelle, you have the floor for 4.
Is it not you?
Yeah.
Anna, floor for 4.
Sorry, Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to both the witnesses. Some very powerful information for us. I'd like to ask Jessica a question. So I'm looking into looking out for each other project. That's an amazing project, and getting the community involved. I guess my question for you would be, how do you feel about both the Indigenous police and the RCMP working closer together? And the reason I ask this question is we did a tour last year, the Status of Women did a tour, and one of the things I learned, which I wasn't aware of, that people will kidnap children or women, and they'll take them across the country before you know it. So if we were to work together, do you think that that would help prevent some of these situations? Jessica?
Thank you very much for your question. I think I mentioned before there's an intersectionality of overlapping oppressions that are facing our communities. And I do believe that there needs to be a partnership between all sectors, whether it's justice, healthcare, child welfare, with Indigenous peoples, and it needs to be Indigenous-led. But of course, because the federal government has a fiduciary responsibility for status, non-status, Métis, and Inuit people, that underlying support needs to be there. So it definitely is without a doubt that, different sectors, whether it be justice and others, need to be working with Indigenous communities.
So I guess my question would be, how do we educate our youth?
I'm going to have to interrupt for 1 moment. Did I not? The bells are ringing.
Oh.
I'm going to ask for unanimous consent for our committee to continue till 5:25. Can I have unanimous consent? All saying yes? Go ahead, Anna.
Okay. Thank you, Madam Chair. So how can we educate our youth so that they're aware of these situations? And how can we educate the men so that they understand how they need to be more respectful of women? What do you see as lacking in that?
When I think about youth, I think about like the child welfare system, and there is a link between MMIWG and Canada's child welfare system, but also how can we be empowering youth is, having more preventative measures within our communities. Like I mentioned before, we need more supports in our grassroots communities. We need human, technological, and fiscal capacities in order to lead and protect our communities in good ways. And so I think to answer your question, there needs to be more culturally appropriate services and youth empowerment initiatives within communities in order to be, empowering our children, our youth, our families, and also our men, so that all men, our greater community, our greater society can do better to combat missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls, Two-Spirit, and gender diverse peoples. Thank you.
So in the book that I read, it's called If I Go Missing by Brianna Johnny. I'm not sure if you read it. She states in there, and she doesn't hold back, she was 14 years old when she wrote the book, and she also admits that her father was a drug addict and an abuser, and it was the strong will of her mom that helped raise her so that she could do, and obviously she's done amazing things. I always feel that if, as mothers, whether we have sons or daughters, and I have one of each, it's our responsibilities to show that respect so that women aren't re-victimized by the male counterparts.
10 seconds to respond.
Oh.
I didn't hear a question.
Was there a question? Yeah. Okay. There was no question. I'm sorry. I have to pass it on as we're continuing. I'm passing it on to, Sonia. Sonia and Mark, you have the floor. I'll start with Sonia. 4 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, all the witnesses, for insightful, valuable testimony. And thank you, Leah, for your advocacy. My first question is this. We know that many Indigenous languages are spoken in Canada. On last panel, Tuesday, we heard from Ms. Jesty about how their model is unique because it allows First Nation chiefs to broadcast alert using their own voice in their own languages, making the alert more accessible. Can you talk about the importance of making sure these alerts are accessible in Indigenous languages? Ms. Cooper, you can answer that question. And then after that, Madam Chair, it's over to Mark.
Absolutely. It's absolutely good to have your own Indigenous language. Unfortunately, I don't speak Mi'kmaq. Mi'kmaq was taken from my mother as a residential school survivor, so I wasn't fortunate enough to learn Mi'kmaq. So if the code or alert was done in the Mi'kmaq language, I wouldn't know it. A lot of urban people have lost their languages. A lot of urban communities have multiple languages. So I'm on Mi'kmaq territory, my ancestral homelands. My mother born and raised here, so have I. But we also, as urban, service Cree, Ojibwe, Tlingit, Algonquin, Mohawk. I think it's great when you're looking at an Indigenous on-reserve community that was able to keep its languages. But when you're looking at urban centers, you often have multiple languages, multiple nations. And I don't know if that would be a very effective way to do it. Not saying it can't be done if they're Inuit and the national, it's put out in national and Inuit and then followed by English and then followed by French or something along that line. But I don't know if I would be in support of a call out for the Mi'kmaq language that I was an unfortunate never able to speak and my mother lost because of the residential school. I think that would hit the mark, miss the mark in some places. If you're on reserve, and there's some reserves in Inuit communities that still speak very fluently, and I love it in those communities, absolutely. But if you're looking at missing murdered across Canada, how many languages are you willing to put it out in? Would be my question.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to our witnesses. And I thank Leah for having brought this study to our committee. I think we need more time for witnesses because the last time I'd asked questions, and I think we have to bring the federal representative back to our committee. And there is a chair who represents the 10 provinces and 3 territories. I think we should invite that person to come and appear. Ms. Cooper talked about various models of systems with alerts. But I find it terrible because Quebec wanted an alert system. So why should we in the federal government or in a province add a red dress alert? Why hasn't it already been implemented?
Suriname committee right now nationally, why have they not included murdered Indigenous women as missing in the alert system?
15.
Why has that not happened?
10 seconds to respond.
Madame Savoy?
I hate to do
Hi
this.
there.
I hate to do this, but we do have to cut you off because we're so tight on questions. If there is an answer that you have for that, we would greatly appreciate that in writing so that we can get that. I'm going to pass the floor now over to Audrey Laroche for 2 minutes.
Merci beaucoup, Madame la Présidente. Merci encore.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Ms. Savoy and Ms. Cooper. I'd like to get back that we talked about in another committee meeting. Now we've talked about the importance of social networks in reaching people when there is someone who's gone missing. Now, are there also traditional means of reaching people or legacy means of reaching people? Now, there were initiatives that we heard about in airports, for example, when we were studying human smuggling. In airports, there are pictures of missing women. So could we combine these two forms, social media and more traditional forms of communication?
I think we can expand that on to airports. We could expand that to bus stops. I've seen them in bathrooms. A poster, you shut the door and there's a picture there. So I think there are so many opportunities, and in some places, because of technology, I'm technologically challenged, so I have to excuse me. There could be videos on the screen of an airport where there are pictures that are being shown while people are waiting to board an airplane, a bus, in a bus stop. Like, there's so many opportunities now where you can have multimedia to help with the large amount, because if you're sharing this now Canada-wide, you're looking at how many missing were Indigenous women a day. But I'll leave it if Jessica would like to speak on that.
Yes, thank you. I just want to refer back to Call for Justice 2.4, and it calls on governments to provide the necessary resources and permanent funds required for the preservation and revitalization of Indigenous cultures and languages. You know, we've lost so much due to colonialism, residential schools, and so I'll just leave it at that.
Jessica, I hate cutting you off because you've got so much
fine.
to add, and I do apologize. Leah, the last 2 minutes.
Thank you. My last question is for Madame Savoy. You spoke about the child welfare system been called the pipeline for murdered and missing Indigenous women and girls. And we know a lot of folks that are part of the child welfare system don't have connection to community or family, often who become murdered or missing. How would an urban alert be different than a rural alert, taking that into account?
That's it's a great question, and I think we could utilize what's already been done in regards to the Ambers alert. I know Lisa mentioned something about getting consent to, or asking people if they're interested in receiving these types of alerts. But I think it's important to note that 80% of Indigenous peoples live off reserve across this country, and oftentimes if a child is taken away from their family, they are off reserve. So there definitely needs to be implementation and initiatives to really draw the link between MMIWG and Canada's child welfare system. I'll just leave it at that. And I'm not sure if Lisa, if there's time for more.
I would just quickly add that the federal government should look at if they're making sure there's clean water, and they haven't done that very well, but they should make it that there is internet in all places, including rural places, because that's where people are at risk. And if they had some sort of even dial-up or something, at least as the start, so that has to be a federal investment.
Perfect. On behalf of the committee, I'd really like to thank Jessica and Lisa for coming today. This has been absolutely fantastic. We have agreed to end at 5:25. It's 5:26. So today's meeting is adjourned. But thank you very much to everybody. Adjourned. Good enough? Okay.